The Guild of Heroes. Number 1. Newcomer. Dorian stamped his feet in an effort to keep warm as his breath ghosted from chapped lips, and he glanced around at the frosted landscape. He was starting to think this might have been a mistake. He was from the south. He had no business in this world of sharp edges and ice. With numbed fingers, he reached into the pouch at his belt and pulled free the letter, just to reassure himself. It bore a blood-red, magically enchanted seal. To copy the seal was illegal throughout the land, and even if you could master the magics to forge your own, you probably wouldn't get away with it. Dorian Wright. Congratulations! The position of Bard has opened in the Guild of Heroes, and your deeds have been deemed sufficiently heroic to bring you to our attention. After an extensive vetting process, you have been selected. Please come to the Crossroads of Manur in 2 months' time to meet with 2 of our representatives, who will guide you the rest of the way to our headquarters. We hope to see you soon. The Guild. Dorian's mouth pulled into a tight smile. He'd been chosen, and gods it felt good to be chosen. Still, he rubbed the frost from his well-trimmed beard. This place was a little ridiculous. Perhaps there was some spell of eternal winter over the land, and he was needed to help lift it. Distantly, he heard the sound of a horse snort. At least he thought it was distant. Everything was muffled with a thick layer of white. Even the tracks of the wagon which had brought him this far seemed to have vanished from view. He rubbed his arms and stamped his feet again. His boots, while well made and lined with rabbit fur, were not sufficient to keep his feet dry here. There it was again, definitely a horse, and now the low mumble of people speaking. He turned in the direction of the sound, suspecting he was looking down what had been a wide road before the snow had rendered all things equal. He stood doggedly beside the thick wooden signpost which marked the crossroads, the only indication that he was in the right place. "Hello?" he called. "Ah, you see, we are late," a female voice. "Or the lad is early," a male tone countered. "I might be a bit before my time," Dorian admitted to the air, peering through the widest gap in the trees, which he assumed was where the road wound into the wood. Finally, 2 horses came into view. Astride them were the speakers. The leader was an elegant woman clad in a white gown. She rode side saddle on a leggy bay courser. The woman wore her blonde hair coiled up around her head, and she rode with the bearing of a noble. Dorian briefly wondered if he should bow. Behind the woman, on a thick-legged red warhorse, rode a powerful-looking man. Dorian almost gasped to see that the second rider was shirtless in this weather. He did not seem the least bit bothered by the cold, and even his horse was without saddle. Man and beast made quite a wild-looking pair. The man was thickly muscled, and a broad axe swung lazily from his hip. His face and chest were latticed with scars, but his expression was pleasant and animated as he spoke with the woman. "Ah, there he is! You see, right on time." He turned his dark, surprisingly intelligent eyes on Dorian. "You didn't wait long, did you?" Not at all," Dorian lied. He was still trying to reconcile the odd pair who had come to collect him. Surely these people couldn't be from the guild. Wouldn't they have uniforms? Yet they seemed to know who he was, and the big man was leading a fully saddled 3rd horse, which Dorian suspected was for him. "Now then, Gavin," the woman scolded. Her accent was high-born, deeply contrasting the man's, which bore the drawl of a northern commoner. "Look at him, frozen to the bone. He's from the south, not equipped for the winters here." The woman was fishing through a pack on her horse's saddle. "This cold is natural?" Dorian asked with a grimace. "I'm afraid so," said the woman, handing him a fine fur blanket she had extracted from her pack. Dorian draped it thankfully around his shoulders. "You have your letter, yeah?" the man called Garvin asked, urging his big horse up to Dorian. The massive animal breathed a huff of sweet-smelling air in Dorian's face. The bard stepped back a bit and held out his letter. It was already worn around the edges from having been read so many times. "The guild is in need of a bard?" he asked by way of making conversation as the shirtless giant scanned the letter. Indeed so, the woman smiled. Her lips were a perfect splash of red against her pale face. Dorian knew these northerners had white skin, but hers was like porcelain. He couldn't decide if it was beautiful or worrying. Looks to be in order. The big man smiled and handed back the letter. Good to meet you, lad. I'm Garvin, as you might have guessed, and this is Eyre. He gestured to the woman who dipped her head in greeting. Dorian did bow, if a bit uncertainly. These people would be his employers and peers. He was eager to make a good impression, though he wasn't certain exactly how. This is yours. Garvin gestured to the third horse, a pale gray animal built low to the ground and rather shaggy of coat. Still, it looked friendly enough. Dorian already missed his old mount, which he had been forced to leave at home. Dorian took the offered reins and petted the horse's neck. Hello there, fella. What are you called? His old rider called him Dusty, Garvin said, a lopsided grin etching its way across his craggy face. That was our last bard. He won't be needing a horse any longer. Dorian stopped petting and looked at the grinning man. He shot a glance towards Eyre, whose face was cool and impassive, as though she might have been carved from ice herself. Well, Dorian moved to slide a foot into the stirrup. I think Dusty will do fine if he's used to it. Very well. Eyre turned her mount back towards the path they had come down. If it suits you, Master Bard. Master Bard. Dorian let her words roll around in his mind as he swung his leg up over the horse's back and settled himself in the saddle. The other two were already riding towards the trees as he pulled his mount around to follow. These people were certainly not what he had been expecting, but then again, he wasn't sure what he had been expecting. The Guild of Heroes was hardly more than a legend where Dorian came from. When word had reached him that he might apply for admittance to the group, he had hardly believed it true. But what harm could it be to try? And now here he was, riding into the forest behind a half-naked giant and a fine lady. Garvin had even more scars on his back, wide and long like the claws of some massive beast had scored the great man's flesh. Dorian swallowed hard and drew the furs Eyre had given him more tightly around his shoulders as he watched the oddly contrasted pair. So a bard, eh? Garvin asked, turning to grin back at Dorian. Garvin, you know he is, Eyre sighed, waving a delicate hand dismissively. What my companion means to ask is, will you sing him a song? I'm most partial to a spirited ditty, Garvin said, still beaming. It'll be good to have a bard again, and I hope you're not like that last one. He never sang anything but sad ballads about lost love and people going to war and dying. Eyre clucked her tongue, curling her lip. She clearly felt the same way about the previous bard's offerings. Dorian nudged his new horse with his heels, urging the animal to catch up with the others. They moved to accommodate him, and for the first time he felt properly welcomed as they both looked at him expectantly. I'm not much for tavern songs, Dorian admitted. I was trained in the School for Bardic Magic, so we mostly learned battle chants. Are they sad? Asked Garvin. They're not anything, Dorian shrugged. They're a form of magic, so it's not like proper songs with lyrics and melody. I do know a few epic songs. They're a tradition in my culture. Wasn't it a battle chant that drew the guild's attention to you? Eyre asked, raising a perfectly arched brow. Her forehead was adorned with 3 hanging blood-red jewels that emerged from her hair and gleamed with each movement of her head. Yes, I suppose so, said Dorian, feeling a bit shy. He liked singing songs of other people's exploits, but found relating his own to be a bit uncomfortable. My kingdom was at war with a neighboring one. He waited for the two to make a comment about Southerners always fighting amongst themselves, but neither spoke. Dorian pressed on. I was called out for a large battle. We bards were spread thin, and I was to have an entire section of the front line all to myself. It was the most people I had ever protected and aided with my magic. The healers and druids were already overworked. When the fight started, I used my best songs to aid them, and the line never broke. Several other units crumbled, but ours was able to maneuver itself to their rescue. Dorian rubbed the back of his neck, self-conscious. When it was all over, I fell onto my cot and slept for hours. My voice was all but gone. When I woke, the generals told me that I was one of the sole reasons we survived the day. Well done. Eyre dipped her head. and gave him a brief smile. Dorian wondered at his two companions. He knew the guild would only allow one fighting or magical class at a time to make up their ranks. Highly trained individuals with enough heroic deeds could apply, but obviously very few were admitted. One had a better chance of being eaten by a crocodile than becoming one of the fabled heroes tasked with saving the land in times of need. He suspected his own opportunity was a strong case of right place, right time. His application had come across someone's desk exactly as they were seeking a new bard. Why look further than he? "If I might ask, what did you do to become accepted into the guild?" Dorian queried. "You might ask," Air said, her ruby lips forming a tight smile. "But I feel those are tales for another time, once you are settled." Dorian wasn't certain that Garvin was paying attention. "Battle chants and epic songs, eh? Well, one of them is bound to pass the time." He looked expectantly towards Dorian. All right," Dorian said, clearing his throat. "But I warn you, it's probably not what you're used to." He pulled in a lungful of frigid air and almost coughed it back out again. His first note was destined to be born an ugly squawk at this rate. Before he had a chance to worry about this further, an arrow whizzed past his head.